I'm like, oh, I really don't know. That's
Right.
exciting, right? And there is something in when you look at like more indigenous rituals, there is often not the explanation, right? It's the experience
Hmm.
that we're having, like the ecstatic dance, like in like really getting in a trance state, or like psychedelic states. Like our modern mind wants to grasp all this, and I don't think that is like has to go away. But there's also, oh, like we don't know, and maybe it's just about the experience and trusting that, and let that move through us. Like I believe there is a lot of healing in that, or healing or transformation, that's maybe a better word. And yeah, often we don't know. And I think going into a circle with, oh, I really want to get this out, this or this out of this, is often not really, yeah, well, we can be present with why do we want to be with that. But I think if we really open up and allow life to move through us, and like all those forces, and I'm holding it as forces we don't know also. So it's not only the group of people, but we're in a building, and things happen there before us and will happen after us, and there's like earth underneath where like millions of years things happened. That's all there.
The container is now open. Martje Witzel is a master of the surrendered leadership practice. And in this interview, she kind of walks us through all that really means for her on a spiritual level, on a psychological level, and on an interpersonal level. And then we kind of end up in this really cosmic place where we wonder, where does God fit in all of this? And is God like another word for some of the things we encounter and meet in this strange surrendered leadership space? No, check out this interview with Martje Witzel. Martje Witzel, welcome to the container.
Hmm. Thank you.
Ah,
Yeah.
um, I want to share both with you and with the listeners this like moment that's burned into my mind. We've only had like a few days worth of actually being in the same space at the Transformational Connection Festival. But there's this moment in a surrendered leadership block of time that we were in together, and I remember making eye contact with you, and you were sort of, some energy was coming up in you, and you started to become sort of like it wasn't anger necessarily. It felt to me like some kind of aggressive presence, though, some kind of like tiger energy or lion energy. And I was I was sitting like still getting my bearings, like still sort of, trying to land. And then I just locked eyes with you and you started jumping up and down. And I was like, I felt like I was getting some kind of transmission from you. And
Hmm.
I was like, I felt like I was becoming like this other pole in this like temporary system we had set up. And then you were off to something else, and then I was sitting there just like, okay, I can do this. And yeah, that was like such an incredible experience. Um and now you're on the podcast, and that's very exciting to me.
Yeah, I'd like it's really interesting to hear your experience of an interaction with me. Like in the practices, in we often like reveal, but we not always, right? So now I hear like your side of the story of that moment, and it feels warm. And I shied away a bit by the word aggressive, but then I like, yeah, it is like force and fierceness, and it might land as aggression. Uh, and yeah, tiger comes up in me. and the embodiment of that. Thanks for sharing. That's nice.
Yeah, so I guess we were talking about a little bit before the interview, like starting with um getting a sense of the practice for you and like how you came to it and how it all falls under this idea of surrendered leadership. Which Sai and I, after the festival, have been really, I think, kind of trying to reorganize a lot of things around this. So I think we're going to be very.
We are your students in this moment. Like, I feel very much, I'm feeling like I'm at a class and you're going to be teaching me, and not to like build pressure around it or something, but the way that I think I've oriented toward the practice over the last couple of years, it's like looking at it from all these different directions and then experiencing the International Transformational Connection Festival, and what surrendered leadership looked like there, which I imagine is different than what it looks like in a smaller setting. Also, it had this. It just has me seeing it from yet another angle, or like a more like underneath or from above way, like that is just much more holistic and more ethereal and more spiritual, and just it just has me really excited to hear more from someone who's been doing it for much longer than me.
Yeah. Shall I start with like a short like moment like where I discovered circling and surrender leadership? Which was like I think 9 years ago at another festival, and John and Sean were giving a workshop there, and at an integral community where I lived, and yeah, I joined that workshop, and it was like entering a different quality that was in the air. I often sense like spaces, and like it's not always like tangible, but like, oh, what's like the quality here? And it felt like really truthful and open and raw and mysterious for me. And we were circling. It was not like a super different practice. We were not really doing something different, I think, than we were now, although it might have like has evolved during time. Yeah, so I met them, and I kind of like on and off was following workshops, and there was circling nights in Amsterdam, and I started doing authentic relating. I have a background in tantric practices and integral, so things kind of weave together in that sense. And for the last 4.5 years, I've been really like stepping into more leadership in the practices where I did like multiple SESs. I'm assistant now with Circling Europe in their SESs and at the festival. And I lead circling nights in Amsterdam and have my own coaching business. And yeah, now I'm with why did I like choose that path, or what was that? And I think it's linked to surrendered leadership. Yeah, where I'm holding that as a way of being, a way of how we can live life, where and we practice that in surrender leadership circles, but also in daily life, where I have the intention to be true and surrender to what's here, while also like taking the leadership and guiding myself with that. And taking that on more and more, things started moving in my life in a direction that feels way more truthful. I moved out of the city. I spent time every my cat is joining. Every year for a few months in the United States, in the wilderness. A friend of mine has land there. Uh, Work has been flowing. Yeah, so that's a bit the story. And I already weaved in a bit my view on the practice and how I hold that.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's something listening to you, something that jumps out at me is this idea of surrendered leadership seems to it seems to just be so much bigger than a way that you can practice. It's like it really builds into this like way of being in your life, not just in the present moment, but also like what kind of big decisions am I going to make? Like there people I think I'm seeing this pattern where people who are trained in this kind of circling Europe surrendered leadership mode are like they're like self-realizing through it,
Hmm.
and it starts to feel so much bigger. um yeah, I'm just appreciating that there's this way that like leadership feels like taking full ownership of everything. And yeah, I don't know, that's just like really alive for me right now, is that
Hmm.
just the size of surrendered leadership.
I'm wondering if you could, with that with that in mind, just the way Jonathan is saying that, I think there's somewhere that I get hung up on the term, and that maybe other listeners also may get hung up, and that maybe we can kind of flesh it out a little more, which is with the term leadership.
Hmm.
Um, when I think of leadership, I think of my boss at work who's,
Yeah.
directing everything and making all the decisions. Um, I think of like the president or the prime minister, like the leadership of the country. And I get a sense that in surrendered leadership, we're talking about something sort of different. And I'm just I'm just wondering like how it orients with that tag of surrender.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the easiest way to describe it is self leadership. And, but not, it's like not from coming from a place with only thinking. So it's really, then this is where the surrender comes in, like what's really here in me, in my body, in my emotions, in my thinking, and in my surrounding. And uh and from there, like finding like the most truthful expression or movement. And that can be like a literal, like embodied movement, but it could also be in life, like, oh, I'm going to send this email movement. Um, like, what's the most fruitful expression right now
Wow.
Mm.
Wow.
of me here as a human in connection?
Yeah, it's like another level of, it's like mindfulness, but in it's like applied mindfulness in moment to moment in connection. It's like applied mindfulness into connection with the outer world, with other people, with anything that's happening
Mm.
in your moment to moment.
Yeah, and I think in that, and like a bit more of an, like we can hold the term surrender often like, oh, like as passive, like we're surrendering and we're just being. but it's kind of like an active surrender. Like I choose to say yes to this moment.
Mm.
And I'm also choosing to that's more like the leadership part, like to change the moment. If it's not like we're being with, but we also have influence on, and we can bring direction. And that's also where there's a big distinction between only like circling or related practices and surrendered leadership. In surrendered leadership, we can include more. Like we can include coaching or embodiment, or as a participant, but as a leader too.
Mm.
But since we're all like, when we're in a circle, there is a leader, and we're all practicing self-leadership, including the leader. So if the leader like brings like wants something, he can express it, but it's not like the context that the group will follow that, because they're all in their own leadership.
Right.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, something that's making me think of how something I really noticed is that in a lot of circles I've been a part of, the main practice is disclosing what is coming up for you, or like your experience, and getting really good at fully owning your all the dimensions of your experience, so that you're not like so that you're just being extremely mindful of how you're framing things, and really becoming great at paying exquisite attention to the present moment as it is arising. But then but then being in these spaces where like surrendered leadership is the practice, I was noticing, like, if that circling you could say making object of, then this is surrendered leadership begins to make subject of. Like, you start actually allowing what's emerging to fully express itself through you. And there's this way that rather than people putting a lot of like burning a lot of calories trying to disclose correctly,
Mhm.
they're like getting out of the way and just allowing
Yeah.
what's emerging to happen. And there's this way that it's like being mindful. Something that came up in when you were talking, I was thinking like it's a mindfulness, but like a dharma mindfulness, like allowing the path that you're on to just sort of like move through you or something.
Yeah, I think I can speak to like something which is kind of what you're saying, but I use different words.
Love
Um,
it.
think when we start practicing like circling or surrendered leadership, I think the main first entrance is we are really like starting to notice. That's the mindfulness part. Like, we're becoming like the witness, where we are really aware of what's happening inside of us, and when something happens with someone else, how that impacts us, and we're really like building that muscle of witness, the witness perspective. And then, but it can also be a bit like out of immediacy. So because we're like, you have this thing happening in you, and then like, for instance, like fear, that's quite intense. And then, oh yeah, I have to like say, oh, I notice I am afraid. And then you kind of like remove yourself a little from the immediate experience, which is not like a bad thing, but it's just a way, it's a thing that happens or can happen. And the other like part is life force. And where what I often see now, and especially with people who are longer in the practice and like gone through an SES, they start to enter like that more. They're really like feeling their body sensations more, and um have an allowance of what's here, and let life force come through them. And that often results in like a very immediate expression, which is what you were referring to. Like, it's not like super slow maybe, or it can be really like, oh, I'm afraid, or I feel so angry, or like it's also often the I notice falls away.
Mm-hmm.
And we're still inviting to stay present while being in that. So it's not like, oh, I can just like say whatever I want. Well, yeah, no. I would not like invite people to do that. I'm also but yeah, you can say whatever you want with an invitation to stay present and in connection, or yeah, open to an impact.
If you would like to support our work in bringing you conversations with the best voices in circling, authentic relating, and spirit forward living, then there's actually 3 easy ways you can support us. The first, if you're watching this on YouTube, simply like, subscribe, and leave a comment. That really helps us with the all-powerful, all-seeing, all-knowing algorithm. If you're consuming this as a podcast, rate and review on whatever platform you're using, and share this with people you think would be interested in this kind of content. And the best way you can support us is by becoming a patron at patreon.com/thecontainer. Patrons get access to our enormous series, The Way That Can Be Told, where we circle the Tao Te Ching and see how it's kind of this ultimate manual for relational arts. And if you're a paying member of our Patreon, then you also get free admission into events put on by The Container. We appreciate anything you do to support the show. We feel really humble and lucky to be able to bring you these conversations. And now back to this one with Martje.
So then this brings up a really big question, a burning question in me, Martje.
Yeah.
Which is that it feels like if you had asked me in a room to participate in like surrendered leadership before I knew how to do more like low levels, not low level, that feels weird. Like more making object of, more noticing.
Yeah.
If I hadn't have built those tools over multiple years at this point, I don't like I feel like I need to have done that to actually be able to do the surrendered leadership. It's almost like it looks and feels a lot more like just doing what comes up, but you actually, to be fully present and to be fully connected to life force in that, it feels like you need to have this like sterilization through noticing or something. Is that your experience, or do you feel like you can just be directly trained from zero to surrendered leadership?
I don't like, often the people who come, also newcomers, are already interested in presence, right? Who join. So I think it can go hand in hand. And when I lead a workshop, I often start with noticing exercises, or like training that muscle and inviting people into that before we move into other like group or birthday circling or surrendered leadership. So at least there is some, and I think it can build up like next to each other. Like you can practice circling and really getting someone's world and be present with that, while also like practicing surrendered leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a very like a space that's very, yeah, how to say it right. I want to be precise around this. Like it's important for me. It's really like a meaningful practice, and I want to transmit it well. the space of surrendered leadership can be confronting, like bring up a lot, because it's less structured, and there are less like rules. And for people who are newer, that is often the most like scary thing. Like,
Yeah.
oh, what are we doing here?
Right.
And like in the past, it would be more like, oh, let's explore that. How is it to be that uncertain? And that can be a truth to explore that with someone. While nowadays, I sometimes also bring more context. Oh, like just give more information so it's easier for a person to move in the space.
I Something that's coming up for me, and this is like a technical kind of uh wanting to sort of unravel the experience of a very like ethereal experience, like in a very technical way, and so I don't know if this will land well or not, but when you were describing with surrendered leadership that it's it starts with this grounding, or with kind of settling in and noticing, and maybe it starts slow, and then there's this allowance for the life force to come through, and then you're sort of existing, existing, or expressing from life force. My question is, do you think that life force has its own consciousness, like separate from
Mm.
separate from like, are those yeah, is like that life force, is this, are we talking about kundalini in a way,
Mm.
for one thing, and then is it its own consciousness versus, and so you're like trying to find a way to sort of blend, you're surrendering yourself enough so that this other consciousness can come through, you know what I mean?
I think I'm holding it more as the soul coming through, like the expression of my humanness in this moment.
Yeah.
And in the beginning, we spoke about the tiger, right? That's like forceful, and but life force can also be being in stillness.
Hmm.
And maybe I make it a bit more complex now because I described it as like the word life force sounds forceful, right? Like strong, but you could name it life energy, um, expression, more the Shakti, um, energy, like the feminine energy
Hmm.
coming through. And you asked, has it its own consciousness? I don't know how to answer questions like that. I'm
Yeah.
feeling like,
I
like, oh yeah, that's like I often don't look at the world in a like I can go very meta, but like in a not in a yeah that way.
Yeah, I had a sense that there was about a 50% chance that you
Yeah,
would say, I don't really know how to answer that
yeah,
question. So it's okay. It's totally okay.
yeah. I do want to like name that like it's not like that it always is like first we're in the witness and then in life force. It can like go back and forth and like weave in, and like during in a surrendered leadership circle people have conversations about things, and still from like the intention of presence. And it can be like, oh, like yeah, like my expression of me right now is that I really want to have a like tell a story to someone. I recently had that when like I just had like so much experience. I came back from traveling, immediately going to an SES weekend. And I just was full of stories and I wanted to tell stories. And I know, oh yeah, we're in this space where we're kind of present, and can I tell a story? But Life Force wanted me like me to tell a story. And in a surrendered leadership circle, I connected with someone who was really like in, oh yeah, I want to hear your story. And we had like a wonderful time. And we stayed present with, oh, how is it to share it share it, but also like not constricting ourselves from that thing that wants to like move through right now.
Yes. This feels like a very familiar, I almost want to call it like, I want to call it a wall, but it's not a wall, but it's like a level or a place that our community gets to often in what we previously had framed as or named circling, that we're all doing that witness, and we're all getting really good at that. But then sometimes we go into these other places that are outside of the bounds or the rules or whatever, but we are still in that state. Like we are in that state of consciousness that feels like we are definitely circling, but we're doing all these things that aren't what we used to call that.
Mm-hmm.
And in our practices, we do a ton of debrief. So like we'll finish a circle and we'll talk about what happened in that circle for an hour afterwards. Like we'll, dissect it. And but this is a place that we get to often, and we wonder like, well, what is this other thing that we're now doing? And I feel like it must be kind of in a way like the way the community of Circling Europe eventually sort of evolved into. I mean, I'm curious if it's like similar to how they evolved into the surrendered leadership, you know?
Yeah, like I know the stories, and I think it's more like for Sean and John to share those.
Sure. Yeah.
This like what I know from it, it emerged like instead of, oh, we're starting this practice, like starting an event, oh, and then we're gonna do starting a practice, but before we practice, we're in this space, right? We're already in a group. We're kind of already started, but we kind of start when the practice starts, like when we're gonna do birthday circling, and that changed. And it's also how I often lead now. I have like a ton of exercises I could do. I feel into where am I at, but then I'm holding it very openly. I first want to be in the group and feel what's present and move from there, instead of like putting a fixed structure on what we're gonna do. And this is it's a bit, yeah, it feels more scary in a way, or like vulnerable, uh, and more truthful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that feels extremely scary to me, to think about going into a group and facilitating it with, like, by like almost through just sense of smell, like, oh, okay, this is how we're feeling, and then, oh, maybe we'll do this to move over here. And yeah, it seems like much more, it requires a level of mastery
I was
that
just about to say.
seems, yeah.
And
it seems-
practice, like just hours on the mat almost.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah.
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 So then I'm curious to, like, I think I have like a much better idea of your practice and how you see it, and then it's making me curious about uh going to stranger places with it. Like, what what exactly is this field of presence that we're able to create? Where is God in all of this? How are we able to, like, channel and do all these crazy things when we just, like, kind of get out of the way and allow life force to come forward? Why are there all these, like, magical experiences and like mystical states possible? What is going on, Marcia?
Yeah. I was like a bit anticipating on this question, and then oh, like hearing you speak, I'm like, oh, I really don't know. That's exciting, right? And there is something in um when you look at like more indigenous rituals, there is often not the explanation, right? It's the experience that we're having, like the ecstatic dance, like in like really getting in a trance state, or like psychedelic states. Like our modern mind wants to grasp all this, and I don't think that is like has to go away. But there's also, oh, like we don't know, and maybe it's just about the experience and trusting that,
Mm.
and that move through us. Like I believe there is a lot of healing in that, or healing or transformation. That's maybe a better word. I like that better. Yeah. um uh and yeah, often we don't know. And I think going into a circle with, oh, I really want to get this out, yeah, this or this out of this, is often not really, yeah, well, we can be present with why do we want to be with that. But I think if we really open up and allow life to move through us, and like all those forces, and I'm holding it as forces we don't know also. So it's not only the group of people, but we're in a building, and things happen there before us and will happen after us. And there's like earth underneath, where like millions of years things happened. That's all there. The air we breathe, like it all affects us in a way. And I think just allowing us to move in that with presence will bring something. And I'm now like, oh, I should maybe define something. But yeah, I'm more like, yeah, now leaning into like, oh, what's the mystery of it? And then I can say, oh, what's God here? As I hold God not as, I think, in a traditional way, but in a way of of life.
Can you say more about what you mean by that?
Yeah, I think I hold the kind of God as the mystery of all, which also includes the, like you could call it divine, or like the sacred. I like that word. But also like our humanness is part of it. And like in a sense, we are all connected with everything, right? Like I at least I cannot deny it anymore. Like everything I do has an impact. Like if I sit still, I still breathe air, so it has an impact. And the air is connected with me, but also with the tree outside. Like, and then there's the sun on the tree, and my dead cat is buried underneath the tree, and there are berries on the tree, and I eat them, so I kind of digest my cats. And it's like it's just this big web. Yeah. And we have like the mind in that, which is, I think, sometimes a bit more complicated, like makes it a bit more complicated to experience that we're part of all. And I do see that as God. Feel some fear in stating it, like it's a big word. And at the festival I held a workshop which was called Where We Meet God, which was like a name that came true like a few months ago. And then, oh, I'm gonna do something with that on the festival. And yeah, how can I, it's more like, oh, how can I meet God? And why do I want to meet that? Because it gives me a sense of connection, of being part of all.
The container is now closed. Next week, you'll hear the second part of our interview with Martje Witzel, where we talk about the deeper implications for some of the topics we opened up in this conversation. It's a really great one. We're excited to bring you more of this. If you want to get Martje's coaching services, go to all-there-is.com, link in show notes. Without further ado, we have a beautiful way of closing. Keep it namaste.